Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Today is June 2nd, 2014. May we have roll call, please?
Yes, and before I proceed with roll call, Commissioner Chan and Commissioner Ajemian will not be attending today's meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Camargo?
Here.
Commissioner Hale?
Here.
President Yao?
Present. Next item, please.
2, consent items. A, approval of the April 7th, 2014 meeting minutes.
Okay, for these two items A and B, I'll postpone item B for the next meeting because we have the other two commissioners who were here last time and not the current the two commissioners. So are there any comments or additions for item 2A, approval of the April 7th meeting minutes? For the
I have no changes.
Okay.
None on my end.
Okay, so no changes. Let's approve those minutes. So 2A is approved, and we'll delay 2B for the next meeting.
Okay.
Next item, please.
3, GWP Commission staff comments.
Any comments or updates from staff? I guess we'll incorporate that in the agenda items below. Any other comments from the commissioners? No items? Okay, next item, please.
4, reports information. A, water conservation update.
Okay, Mrs. Owen?
Ms. Hartunian will give you her update.
Okay. Mr. President, members of Commission, hello, my name is Atina Hartunian. I'm here to give you an update on our water conservation outreach efforts and water supply status. As a member agency of the Metropolitan Water District, we're closely working with them on their messaging and outreach efforts, and also utilizing some of their messaging and our own. MWD recently conducted focus groups of residents throughout Southern California to see how they view the drought, the water supply alert, and what messages are working with them and what is not. Some of their focus group findings included that the majority of customers are conserving, that they are well aware that they have to conserve and they are continuing to conserve, that they understand they need to conserve more, especially now versus earlier in the year and last year. Saving money is the primary motivator for them. And also they understand the need to invest in water resources and prepare for future water shortages, that it's just not going to be over. Some of the advertising that they are going to gear towards is helping supplies for the future to replenish our supplies, comparing the lawn versus the California-friendly garden to show the difference between a water-guzzling lawn versus a California-friendly garden and how much water that can save, promoting their landscape classes, and also tapping into the love of California living and how critical it is for our water to maintain that lifestyle and how important it is now and saving it for the future. Also on May 22nd of this year, MWD issued a statement to consumers stating that as we head towards the hot summer months, it's very important to ramp up our conservation efforts, especially outdoors, to preserve the reserves during much of this drought. Since there have been significant withdrawals from Southland water reserves recently to meet demands, every gallon of water saved is one more gallon that we can keep in reserve. So they really want to issue that statement. And as a result, MWD will be bringing back their water meter gauge. If you recall, in the last drought, they issued an image. I don't have it with me because it's not ready yet, but it's an image of a water gauge that shows the Southern California water reserve levels. So they are going to bring that back and put that on all of their advertising. So they'll be sending those out to the member agencies to utilize in their advertising. In addition to what MWD is doing, we have also started our full-fledged outreach and advertising campaign. I have been showing you some of the pieces in our last few meetings, and each time I'll bring you a variety of new things that we're doing. The first one is our table tents. I did mention that we are producing these. We have them on order, and they will be sent to all restaurants in Glendale with a letter asking them if they'd like to order some. We'll either hand deliver them or mail it to them. We've also sent out our static clings to all of our multifamily and commercial buildings. You've seen these before, and so they mimic a lot of the images that we're using. And I'd like to also show you our bus out advertising. These will be going in our Glendale Beeline buses, both inside and outside, either on the sides or the back of the bus. So while the messaging is consistent, we'll keep they look the same, but as we move towards comparing some of the focus group findings from MWD, we'll incorporate these images as well as showing comparisons of lawns and versus California-friendly lawns. So that is the outreach information that I have for you today. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Tunia. Can you give us an idea of what the gauge would show? Would indicate the yellow or the red? Is it critical at this point or not yet?
It's not as critical because we are, even though we're drawing from reserves, it is going to be somewhere, if they continue to use the same colors, which we're not sure, but we would be somewhere in the middle. But then sometimes they do a potential, if we continue to draw from reserves, they do kind of like that dashed line that shows by the end of the year we could be in red. So they're kind of deciding on what that gauge will show, but it'll have that flat arrow pointing somewhere in the middle at this point, and then maybe a dotted arrow towards the red.
Yeah, it looks like some of the material are being utilized are effective, and I think it will give the message across. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, please.
4B, customer service update.
Ms. Valle?
Good afternoon. Members of the Commission, Tammy Valier, Customer Services Administrator. The following information is based on our performance through the third quarter. For the most part, you're going to see that we have not had very much fluctuation in the last 3 years in our customer service contacts or service levels. There are many functions within customer service, such as billing and field services, that are not represented in this slide here. What is represented is our telephone calls, counter service, cashiering, and correspondence. Overall, these contacts are projected to be about 7.5% lower than last year. Primarily, we've seen a decrease in the telephone contacts and the payment counter. So like many other industries, we're seeing that customers are moving towards the trend of using more of the self-service options. So if you look at the telephone inquiries, they've been reduced, but the calls completed in the IVR system, the interactive voice response system, have increased. At the payment counter, you see a decrease there, and in the next slide you'll see where that's been increased with our electronic payments. The counter service, a lot of that is just flattened out because of the saturation of many of our programs, but there is a slight uptick in the emails. Keep in mind that these projections are based on our contacts to date, and there's many things that can influence our contacts, such as water conservation, rates, special programs that we may be offering. Even the weather can drastically impact our call volume, so because we have a lot of those items in the pipeline, it'll be kind of interesting to see if we hold at these levels or if our projections are off and they actually are increased towards the end of the year. As far as our payments, you can see our electronic payments have continued to increase, and they're now about 50% of all of the payments that we take in. I anticipate that this number will continue to grow as we implement enhanced web portal for our customers, as long as introducing a mobile application. Our abandoned calls or dropped calls were looking much better the first half of the year. We actually met our goal of less than 4% on several occasions, but you can see in January that changed. We lost 4 CSURs to other positions. We've recently hired 6 new CSURs. They just started a few weeks ago, and they're in training, so we hope to see that improved.
May I ask you a question on,
Sure.
on this slide? So what are do you know what the wait times are before abandonment?
The average wait time is 58 seconds. However, the longest wait time over this last year was over an hour.
Over 1 hour? And do you have an image of how that fall off tracks? That is, how long folks are generally waiting, comfortable waiting before abandoning the call?
You know, I don't have that with me, but I can get that. We do have information that'll tell us exactly when each, how many calls dropped within 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and so on. So I can add that to my presentation for the next time if you'd like.
Okay. Yes, please. I appreciate that.
This is a 3-year comparison of the abandoned calls. like I said, we're actually doing better than last year. And with the new CSRs that are in training, I expect them to be working independently. And I think the first quarter of the new year will probably be meeting our target, unless there's other unforeseen circumstances. But I think we'll be doing okay by then. Our write-off to revenue is good, although just slightly higher in dollars from the 07-08 year. The write-off to revenue percent is currently at 0.08% compared to 1/10 of a percent back then, so we're actually doing better. And then in field services, this area has had the most change in the past few years due to AMI. All of our meters are in. The communications just continue to get stronger. We've been billing off the system now successfully for a year, and most of our standard operating procedures have been updated and re-engineered for the system. So far this year, 91% of our electric move-in and move-outs have been done from the office, 94% of our disconnects, 98% of our reconnects, and then 82% of our service orders have been completed in the office. And the reason that's lower is you have to remember that only our residential customers have the remote disconnect, and then we also don't have remote disconnect for our water orders. And then our rereads and on-demand reads, sometimes we refer to them as special reads, 94% of those have been done in the office. So the remote functionality has reduced our mileage from over 50,000 miles in 2011-2012 to a projected 22,000 this year. And we've avoided a minimum of 12,222 truck rolls. That's actually a pretty low number because many of those rereads and on-demand reads would have resulted in truck rolls. So prior to the remote functionality, we ranged about 3,000 to 3,500 special reads per month, or per year, sorry.
Do you know what that converts to in terms of savings, the reduction in number of miles traveled?
I don't.
That's a considerable drop.
It is. It actually would be more of a drop, except for our field services staff has taken on a lot more responsibility with meter mitigation. So they're doing other functions. And that's it. Do you have any questions?
Any other questions?
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, just a couple of questions. In this report, are there areas in which we have performance goals of our own, or in which we can compare our performance to that of other municipal utilities?
We do. We have the abandon rate is definitely one of them. Talk time, customer talk time, usually is between 3% and 4%, but a lot of utilities are getting away from that now that you want to spend more time on the phone with your customers.
So if that's the case, I would just ask Tammy for the next time if it would be appropriate then to include where on some of these measures we have goals and or we have relative performance targets, to include that in the report.
Okay. Do that.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Ms. Valley.
Thank you.
Well, next item, please.
4C, legislative update.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. My name is Silva Ugulian, and I'm...
You know, it's appropriate, I think, to let's look at Silva, give me the evil eye, Mr. President and members of the Commission. Silva is a relatively new employee to GWP, but not new to the city. She's been with the Public Works Department for several years and done an outstanding job, but she's coming over to essentially fill that gap, if you remember what Lana had filled before in managing our legislative programs, and she interacting with our lobbyists. She'll also be working with our integrated resource planners on our regulatory issues as well. So this is her first foray and her first appearance. So
Welcome.
here
Thank
she
you.
is.
In March, we had at the commission meeting. We had our Sacramento lobbyist from Emmanuel Jones provide you with a detailed briefing on bills working their way through the process. And I'm here to give you guys a quick update on legislative issues. I've provided you with 2 handouts today. One is a list of bills that are being tracked at this point in the session, and the other is an outline for Senate Bill 848, the water bond. Currently, that's the only water bond that is being considered, the only vehicle that's been being considered in the Senate. I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief synopsis of that bill. Senate Bill 848 is regarding Safe Drinking Water, Water Quality, and Water Supply Act of 2014. It's currently in the Senate Appropriations Committee. And the bill includes projects regarding safe drinking water, water quality projects, water supply enhancement projects, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta projects, watershed and ecosystem improvements, water storage projects, groundwater treatment, and recycling water projects. And MWD is opposed unless this bill is amended. At the moment, there are some problematic provisions in there that we're expecting to see some action happen in the next coming weeks. The provisions threaten to abandon the statewide approach to improving water management by creating new, higher standards for some communities and none for others. The second bill that I would like to cover is AB 2188 regarding solar energy permits. Currently, that bill is in the Senate pending referral. And the bill would require a city or county to adopt an ordinance that creates an expedited, streamlined permitting process for small residential rooftop solar energy systems with expedited review within 5 business days of any request to perform only 1 inspection as specified. The current process for the city of Glendale to obtain a permit is approximately 5 to 6 weeks on average. And this is because the city takes more time to evaluate and properly review the system to ensure the safety of the residents. Both CMUA and SCAPA are opposed to this bill. And the next bill that I'll be covering is the Assembly Bill 1782 regarding unlawful wire removal. I'm sorry, both of these bills are listed on the SCAPA update sheet, which has all the list of bills and the positions of SCAPA. So Assembly Bill 1782 regarding unlawful wire removal is currently in the Senate and was referred to the Committee on Public Safety. Under the existing law, it's a crime for any person to unlawfully and maliciously take down, remove, injure, or obstruct any line of telegraph, telephone, or cable, television, or any line used to conduct electricity, and a violation of these provisions is punishable by imprisonment in a county jail or a fine not to exceed $500. The bill would increase this specified amount to nothing exceeding $10,000 per incident. And we are in support of this bill as well as SCAPA. And lastly, I'd like to report on Senate Bill 1139 by Senator Hueso regarding mandatory procurement of new geothermal California Renewables Portfolio Standard Program. The bill would require that each retail seller of electricity to procure a proportionate share, as determined by the Energy Commission, of a statewide total of 500 megawatts of electricity generated by specified baseload geothermal power plants. The bill would also require each retail seller to file with the Public Utilities Commission a plan for complying with the procurement requirement, and it would provide that electricity procured by retail sellers from these baseload geothermal power plants does not count towards meeting their obligation under the California Renewables Portfolio Standard Program to purchase specified minimum quantities of electricity products from eligible renewable energy resources. The bill is currently in the Assembly pending referral, and both CMUA and SCAPA are watching this bill right now because they have some concerns. GWP staff also agrees with them regarding their concerns for the reason that we should be allowed to make our own decisions about our resources regarding the resources to meet the RPS goals for the City of Glendale, and we support local control. Besides that, legislature is now primarily focused on the primary election and budget, and all bills have to be heard by the committees by July 3rd. So from that point on, we will not be hearing from them until August, because they will take their recess and move forward from there. And that's all that I have for you today. If you guys have any questions regarding any of the bills listed on the SCAPA update, I will be happy to provide you with that.
I just have a question about the solar
Yes, sir.
permitting bill. What would it take for the city to be in compliance if that bill were to pass? I mean, we're doing 5 weeks, but now if it's like a standard, maybe there's a procedure in place where the contractors say, yes, they sign off on the checklist that the city imposed on them. Wouldn't that be sufficient?
Actually, we do have a standard in place, but because it goes through so many divisions and departments, it just takes a little bit longer, and it would be difficult to expedite it within the 5 business days that they are requiring within this bill.
Mr. President, this not only would give a preferential, and this is in a great deal of deference to the building officials of California, who have very, very deep concerns about this and ramrodding any type of a permit through, especially something where you're putting weight on a structure. And building officials over the years have seen this cause many problems where you don't have proper structural review. So the thought of expediting that with minimal oversight and inspection, as you heard Silva say, this would reduce us to 1 inspection. That's just something we're not comfortable with from a safety and security standpoint. And I think that's basically where both utilities in support of building officials and municipalities in general through the building departments are saying, hey, solar's great, we want to help you get there, and we do. We not only have subsidy programs, but our building official, our building department has become very, very proficient in these systems and how to help people get those installed. But at the end of the day, I can also give you a list of, I can't give you the list, but I can tell you that there have been several folks who are trying to put these devices on a structure that just wouldn't take it, and you're looking at a disaster waiting to happen. So,
Well, I imagine the reason why they're posing this is that they would have a potentially certified civil engineer looking at it, stamp their professional designation to make sure that it's appropriate for the load, and also whatever it takes to make sure the structure is sound and safe. It's just that they want the permit to take place so they can start the construction, and the city still has the obligation to inspect and maybe to make sure that it does satisfy the safety requirement.
They want the inspections to be expedited as well, and we want to limit the cities to 1 inspection. And quite frankly, back in the day I used to have the building department. I wouldn't agree to that. I mean, I think there's enough. You need as many inspections as necessary to make sure it's safe for not only the person who's living in that house, the next person who lives in that house, the neighbors who live on either side, below, in front. All of those folks are who you take into consideration. Now, to ask, is there a way that we could internally, GWP coordinating with the building department, set up some kind of a process for folks who are applying for solar that might be able to cut down some of that 5-week period? Yeah, it's possible. I think that might be worth engaging the community development department in a discussion and just say, somebody coming in, especially somebody who may be getting a subsidy through our PBC program, who we could say, hey, is there a way that we can do this on the side in a different manner where we can cut it down to, maybe it's 3 weeks instead of 5 weeks or 2 weeks. I don't know if that's possible, but it's certainly something that I think we could begin to talk with CDD about.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the bill in detail to see what the stipulations are, but it sounds like they would require at least a professional civil engineer to maybe stamp the drawing to make sure that the appropriate installation would take place. So I thought maybe they're shifting the obligation from the city and reducing its costs to the contractors and potentially their professional engineers to take a lot of the burden and the risks and the liabilities.
Well, to a great extent, Mr. Yao, that's what happens now, but we still look at every single plan. Those plans may be stamped by a civil engineer, but they're still looked at by our building department, and they go through those with, depending on the complexity of the project, with a lot of care to make sure that they're meeting all aspects of the code. And you just kind of get concerned when you shortchange that process. Now, again, is that to say that we can't come up with something that helps bring that along a little bit faster, it's certainly something we can discuss. I can't speak for CDD, the Community Development Department, but I can certainly engage them in discussions, and I know they'd be willing to do that.
So are we currently looking to amend the bill, or our position is simply to oppose as written?
At this particular point in time, through SCAPA and as a member of SCAPA, we're supporting that. We're just opposing it as it's written now. I'm not sure that, short of gutting it, that you could really amend it to meet the needs of the two sides, have a compromise, I guess you might say.
Questions?
Yeah, so you had mentioned that the bill applies to small solar installations. Does it specify what size the solar installations are?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if
I would
you
have
know,
to look
Silva.
into that.
Yeah.
Small residential rooftop solar energy
So
systems.
it was gearing towards the residential side versus the developer side, because that's a whole different story. You have developers coming in putting huge projects in, but my understanding it was more the residential project.
Yeah, and this seems entirely too prescriptive in its nature. So I would actually move that we recommend to the council that the city actually take a position opposed to that bill as well.
We could do that.
Well, we can't today because it's agendized as a report. But
Then I would,
we could put it on
bring
for
it back up
June
for
if that's
our agenda
timely.
forecast.
How does that work from a time perspective, Silva?
It should be okay because they're going to be busy until June 15th. So
I actually,
It'd be the June 30th.
but I can send an opposition notice. I can even have the mayor send an opposition notice, and I can do that on my own, right?
Right.
Okay.
But on these SCAPA positions where the city's already been aligned with that position?
As a member of SCAPA, but we can also take an individual position as well. And I think, to the extent that they break down who SCAPA is, I think folks know who they are. They're this organization. But I know in the case of Los Angeles, they'll oftentimes, not only through SCAPA but on their own, take positions and through their own lobbyists. So I don't think it hurts. Certainly, it's a letter we can put together rather quickly and have Mayor Sinanian sign that.
And conversely, I would urge us to also support AB 1782 related to the wireline theft, because that's
I think we can do both of those right together. And as you are aware, gentlemen, I'm sure that the copper prices are going to start going up again. They're going to climb as the Chinese government has started back their subsidy program. You're going to see the price of copper go up, and that just makes this all the more important.
So on 1782, sorry, were you going to continue?
No, good.
So you mentioned that SCAPA has weighed in and is in support of 1782. You did not mention CMUA. Have they taken a position?
I don't recall that they have taken a position, but I can find out what their position is on that item as well.
Okay, yeah, just would be helpful to have their support unless they are seeing something in the bill that we're not.
Check it out.
And I had a question about SB 456, the Padilla bill on power content labels, which seems to be a little bit farther along in the opposite house, and it's already been referred to committee. But we've got to watch, potentially oppose. Do you have any briefing materials on that one and what the impact of that bill might be?
We don't have any specifics, but we can put something together to you, and we'll send it out to you on that. And as I think you're aware, this whole battery storage issue is really getting batted back and forth, from everything from cost to the amount of supply that you can get out of that. So not sure exactly where the potential problem here lies, but we'll do some analysis and send that out to you.
Great.
Any other ones? So, Councilor, may I ask Christine, when we can't do a motion for the next meetings, I guess to vote on? I mean, I thought Commissioner Hale can make the motion today, and then so that we can formalize the motion for the next meeting to vote on it.
Well, he could certainly mention and propose that he'd like to move that we approve it. But as of now, we have the legislative update agendized as a report and not for action. So you wouldn't, under the Brown Act, be able to take action on it today. But certainly we could add this to a subsequent agenda to take action on it.
The motion is still, well,
Yeah, so what I can do is amend my motion to add a support position or an opposed position on 2188 and a support position on AB 1782 for discussion during the agenda forecast or for discussion during our next meeting.
okay.
In the meantime, in order to meet the deadlines, we'll have already sent something, but.
Right.
Yeah.
But at least if that's the desire to go on record as having made those positions, that works perfectly well. I'm
Correct.
sorry, don't mean to play attorney.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
4D, 2014-15 budget update.
So, Mr. President, members of the commission, we will get this. This is essentially the water and power portion of the city manager's and the director of finance's presentation to council on the budget. You can do, please, thank you, Gloria. So this is essentially our dashboard for the proposed upcoming year. You'll see our salaries breakdown versus our M&O, our capital outlay, and our capital improvement program for a total 14-15 budget of $373,171,440. No change. You'll look to the right of that box, and you'll just see a breakdown of our personnel. So one department head, and then we have our management staff coming in under the 15% of our total. Our non-management staff, 271, and then we still retain hourlies in specific areas, and we have currently 14 of those. The lower box then is just a snapshot of our key performance indicators, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because Mr. Powers is going to be right up to talk to you about all of our key performance, an update on all of our key performance indicators. These are strategic goals that we had in place for the 13-14 year, and you can see that GWP has 100% completion at this point in those goals, which included bringing back our offsite operations. So we had 2 operations that were leasing space in offsite buildings, and we've brought them back, and they're back in the fold with us in city facilities and all of them in the Perkins building. So we've got all GWP operations outside of the UOC focused in the Perkins building. And then, of course, we completed the electric utility rate restructure and increase, which was critical for us this past year. For 2014-15, you'll see 5 strategic goals that we have. Retain the owner's engineer and complete the integrated resource plan for the repowering of Grayson Power Plant. Implement and complete the pilot phase of the outage management distribution management system. Finalize and close out the Department of Energy modernization grant. Complete the upgrade and conversion of 6 feeders from 4 kV to 12 kV. This is our continuing conversion program to improve our grid efficiency, and then complete the revised strategic plan for GWP. This is how the budgets break down versus 14-15, and the differences in those. This is electric, water, and our public benefit program. You'll notice in electric and water you have pretty sizable increases. It's almost 25% in electric and almost 30% in water. That is primarily from our capital programs. We have, as you recall, when we hit some of our most severe financial challenges, we zeroed out our capital programs. But we've been successful both in electric and water in issuing bonds and reinvigorating those capital programs. So that's what the majority of that cost increase is there. And then this is a breakdown of those 3 same categories where you have you see the salary and benefits, M&O and transfers, capital. And then through our budgeting process, we have our asset capitalization, then you see the ending fund balance bottom lines. Then we go to our capital improvement program, which, as I mentioned, we're happy to have back and robust and moving forward. We've got just the summaries of both water and electric and the annual project budgets. These are our 5-year, you're going to see our 5-year projections. As you're aware, we only fund a 1 year at a time, but we have now the luxury of being able to look out ahead and do some planning. So you'll see that as we go through this. This is pretty detailed. So you'll see it as we break it out between our distribution system and our power management system. On the electric side, our capital program includes both, so that's the power plant and all related aspects of the power plant. And then on the distribution side is our main electrical grid system as it feeds our customers in Glendale. You can see how those break down between general plant allocated capital, and then within the power management group, you see Grayson, our biogas project at Shoal, our life extension program, and capitalized interest. And GPP life extension is the Grayson Power Plant life extension program, is essentially maintenance for the plant as we go forward, anticipating a repower that would then replace the existing facility. And then here's just very minute detail, specific project detail on those same categories. So you'll see here in electric a number of specific projects that we're going to do under the current program. Big one here to highlight on is towards the bottom you see the Grandview substation. That was one of the main impetuses for pushing the bond forward. Several of these, I don't want to say a lot of these, are routine maintenance type operations. But you also have upgrades of some of the substations and certainly the distribution system. Again, just going through meter purchases, transformer purchases, some of it routine, but unfortunately some of those things we had to put on hold because of our financial situation. Then you see here some specific of the 4 kV, 12 kV feeder conversions at Bel Air, Acacia, Tropico, streetlight services, and then general plant allocations. So any questions on these, let me know. And Mr. Boyegas here can answer detailed technical aspects of those if you desire. Grayson Power Plant, and really these are projects that we have here as mostly insurance and emergency type situations, because as we move forward with our repowering effort, we want to make sure that we have a balance, that we're not putting more money into an older plant than we need to. So a lot of this occurs just to keep the current plant running until we can make that transition. So again, a very old plant. You'll see a lot of upgrades and say refurbishments mostly of different aspects of the power plant. And then here you have Shell Canyon. We just have some of our generator or our systems that are up at the landfill actually pushing the gas down to Grayson that needs some upgrades in 16, 17. This is an older plant. We're getting to the point now where we're considering whether or not, as part of the repower, that we do something different up there. The likely scenario is we put something in place that allows us to clean the gas to pipeline quality, and we put it in the natural gas pipeline. That way we can not only use it at Grayson, we can have that can go out to be used at Magnolia or other entities, and we get the full RPS.
So stepping back to the Grayson plant upgrades, yes, and the repowering, what is a similarly sized, in terms of output, power plant cost? Because it seems to me that we have a sort of scales of justice issue where does it make sense to repower Grayson and keep that chugging along, or maybe explore, something new in combined cycle?
To get us to about a 250 megawatt facility, which is what the current Grayson power plant is, at least as it's rated, not that it could ever do that. And that doesn't mean a complete scrapping. We'd probably keep at least one of the units that we have, the newest unit. But you're looking at something in the neighborhood of $250 million, possibly more. I'd say conservatively we'd say between $250 and $300 million. There's an opportunity for us because just modernization of technology alone has made these plants much smaller. So the footprint of the plant is a fraction of what we have out there now. So we could build bigger and partner, like Magnolia and Burbank, for instance. And there are some other utilities that would be interested in local generation. So there's a chance we could do that and help spread the cost that way as well. But part of the first phase, which is to retain the owner's engineer and complete the integrated resource plan, part of that plan is to look at all of our options, all the way from no power plant and relying solely on the market, all the way up to overbuilding and potentially selling that or partnering that as well. Because you could do that as well. We could overbuild the plant and then sell the excess, or we could partner. So every option in between. So we're looking at all of those as this very first initial phase of the repowering effort. I think we'll roll into more our finance director's information, but just showing some of the reserves and the bond proceeds remaining in electric. As you recall, that was a $60 million issue. And then our unrestricted cash reserves, which are growing. That's nice. We're in our first year of the rate increase, our first rate increase, but we're beginning to see the reserves starting to tick up, and that's a positive aspect. So in water, same thing. Here's a breakdown of the categories, project by project. So a lot of our effort on this bond, as we've indicated to you before, is on our distribution system, transmission and distribution, pipes in the ground, valves, not so much storage, a little bit on the pumping side of things. We've got some money in here for recycled water, but we're really going after some of the available grants and bonds or grant funds that are available for recycled projects. And then I said bond because the bond includes a recycled effort. So if that goes through, that's another opportunity for us to bring more money in and begin to augment and build a more robust recycled system. Again, we have a little bit of money still set aside for our Chrome 6 project. A lot of that is budgeted in a manner that's money we get back from other sources, but we still have to budget the line item. And then you'll see some well rehabilitations that we have down towards the bottom of that. It's interesting that as we watch those well rehabilitations, we're seeing our well levels drop dramatically. So we're not sure if we even undertake some of these rehabilitations because the water levels just seem to be dropping as a result of the drought conditions. And we're not the only ones experiencing that. There's a lot of agencies that are beginning to see that as well. So when water levels drop so low, it doesn't become economically viable any longer to continue to draw down on those wells. So to the extent that that occurs, we won't be proceeding with rehabilitations until such time as we see those wells begin to regenerate and maybe become viable again. And then just some pump upgrades, and we have a specific issue with our water hammer at Beaudry. That's a project that has been long in the making, one that we've experienced a lot of issues with. I looked at Ramon to smile because I dealt with those issues as the Director of Public Works and continued to pound away at the water utility at the time. Now I have the opportunity to fix those, and really it's Ramon and his staff who've dug into that. But we just had a situation where we continue to have lines go and valves go, and we had redone streets and sidewalks and everything, and it was just blowing the streets up. So it ended up being a much bigger issue than we had first anticipated. But again, Ramon and his staff have done a great job, and we'll get that fixed, and that'll be great for that particular area. And again, just the specific projects, a lot of maintenance here. And then again, valve replacement and valve installation, which is fairly routine, what we need to do. In some of our existing recycled water installations, we have those down to do some work on those as well. Again, our finance breakdown, you can see there cash reserve deficit still in the negative. That's something we'll probably talk a little bit more about when we talk about rates, especially at the end of this month. That's something that we need to address as well. So with that, do you have any questions on the budget?
Yeah, so question. As you look at the budget forecast overall, where do you see the greatest sort of risks or sensitivities with respect to meeting these numbers?
Well, I think one of the issues that we have with the COSAs for both water and electric, which are fairly new, it sets pro formas in those that are pretty strict guidelines for us to follow. So my directive has been we're at or below that COSA level unless we have some market adjustment that needed to be made. But I think anytime you're looking at, the majority of our budget in electric is buying power and gas. And that's where I think we're the most vulnerable. We have to depend on the market. You have to take some guesses. There's a lot of things that you can do to protect yourself, but there's also, risks that you have to take as well. And we minimize those risks, but it's still there. That's an area that you could see increases. And if you roll into that transmission cost, not just generation cost, but you got transmission costs, transmission tariffs, who's the balancing authority, who's charging you those fees, they can raise those. So that would probably be where we would be most vulnerable. And I think for the most part, getting our CIP program back, we'll work obviously within those numbers that we have. We'll do everything we can to make our infrastructure sound and secure, continue to maintain it in a sound and secure manner, but not overspend and not spend money we don't have. I think most of our other areas are pretty stable and pretty sound, but if you ask one area where we could be a little vulnerable, and we are anytime, and any utility would be, is buying gas and electricity on the open market and the related fees that go with bringing that to Glendale, especially with the renewables.
Any other questions? Mr. Zone, thank you for that update. I just want to look at the revenue versus the appropriations that you just discussed in the budget.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like the revenues from the electric and the water side is going to be less than the total appropriations. And then you have some, I'm sorry, let's go to slide 5. Slide 5.
Okay.
So this pretty much tells us that the utility will get some amount of revenue based on your rates. And then the appropriation is just what you discussed, right? What's been budgeted.
Right.
And then what's the other portion at the bottom to balance it out? I mean, shouldn't all the appropriations be equivalent to the revenue?
Well, you have, okay, so you have your revenues that are coming in, and then you have your total appropriations. Keep in mind, look at that capital number of $63 million. The majority of that is bond money. So that's not what incoming revenue would be. Incoming revenue would be what we'd get from our rates. So as you're aware, when those bond proceeds are done, we would be looking at having to reprogram in capital on a pay-go basis. But that is projected to be probably 3 to 4 years out before we would do that. And by then we would have bolstered our reserves and given us the ability to do that and not have to go out and issue debt.
Okay, I mean, it wasn't clear to me how we're trying to match up the revenue versus the expenses so that we have some kind of a table like a revenue stream to show us that those revenues going to be fixed because the rate is already fixed.
Right, and so this follows the way that the utility actually budgets, and it's a little bit different than the way that the rest of the city budgets, and it's sometimes a little bit difficult to follow that. But for you, what I can do, Mr. Yao, is we'll put it into a little different format that basically, because they did this for me as well, it basically hits the key points, and you can go right to where you want to go and answer the question of here's where you are, here's where revenues came in, it has the bond proceeds, you have the appropriations, and then you see what the ending reserve, roll in the ending reserve balances. And everything.
Yeah, usually, right, the financial statements, you see there's debt obligations and there's capital recapitalization, but then that's broken up so that you can clearly see that there's a revenue coming in and all expenses, including debt payment, all that stuff.
Right.
It's included. But this is not really a financial statement.
No,
right?
no, this is more of a snapshot, and it hits some of the key points, but I can give you something that breaks it down a little bit more. I think, if I understand.
Yeah,
what you're
that'll be helpful just to see where it matches up so that we can tell the public that, no, we're not increasing because of the appropriation. We're not increasing rates or anything. The
No.
rates are fixed.
No, definitely not increasing rates.
But it just shows that it's a higher number than what the revenues are generating.
Right, and again, trying to put those bond proceeds in there,
Right.
which came in, obviously funded, and when we plug those into the budget.
Fair enough. Anything else?
Yeah, actually, I had a question on slide 4. It looks like for the 14-15 fiscal year, the public benefit fund is $264,000 in deficit. What's the source of that deficit?
It's actually a decrease in the budget.
Oh, okay, so it's a
Yeah,
that's a cut. That's
yeah.
not-
So if you look at the adopted current budget, we just lowered our costs.
I see.
We trimmed a little bit in a lot of, we did restructure the staff and then trim some of our costs.
Well, to clarify, the public benefits fund, we haven't discussed this for a while, but that's like the solar incentives, the water conservation budget that draws.
Not water. This is electric only. It only applies to the electric utility. There is no similar
There's no
type of a
PVC.
program for water. But you're right. The solar subsidies come there. Our low income and senior subsidies come out of that, plus a variety of other electric conservation programs. This is where we have our screens and our smart thermostats and some of those things coming out of there. Plus, a lot of our public outreach comes out of this particular operation as well, as we talk to people about conservation and promoting conservation.
But would it also include the purchase of renewable energy for the city, on behalf of the city?
No, that comes out of the electric utility budget. This has a very specific use and a set of guidelines. This is a state mandated fund, and so we have to be really careful. Essentially, it boils down to energy conservation and lowering energy, and you have to actually show that your program is doing that. However, they do allow you to use it as subsidy for low income and senior customers.
Yeah, no, it makes sense for the benefit of the public, but it sounds like potentially it might be able to use for renewable energy for the benefit of the public.
I think the theory is renewable energy is a mandate that we have, and that should come out of the ratepayer. That should come out of your revenue and from the ratepayers as part of your overall program.
Okay.
This is a special fee that goes on for strictly conservation programs.
Yeah, just wanted to get a sense for where the utilities bond rating is with $74 million cash on hand.
We have not had a discussion with the bond rating agency since last year, so our rating didn't change. However, we've had at least one reach out to us and say they would like to schedule a meeting sometime within the next month or so. And what usually happens, as I'm sure you're aware, when one calls you, then the next one will call you. So we should have, probably by the end of the year, I'm looking at Ramon, we should have had all the reviews in, and we'll have what our rating is and if it's moved up at all, and we can come back and give you a report on that. We're done.
And the last time we went through this review, had we passed the rate increase on the electric side? Had the council adopted the rate increase at that point?
We had done the review and had indicated at the time that we were proceeding with a rate increase, and we didn't, as you recall. Council deferred that 1 year. So when we came back again, then they had told them, well, we didn't do it, but we're proposing to do it again. So as you can imagine, they were a little bit cautious in how they dealt with us, and our outlook wasn't as good as we had hoped. They were wanting to see some concrete action. Now that action's been taken, both in regards to the rate and the bond, we're hoping that we'll get a favorable, we'll get an uptick in our rating.
And I'd like to know if we see any savings in our bond purchases or our bond issues as a result of that ratings changes, because we're
yes, and
in our capital.
Mike,
finance.
you want to? Since Mike Bell is sitting in the audience, we'll let him. He had to answer that question quite a bit as we went through these rate scenarios. When they said, "What if our rating drops? What does that mean? How much does it cost us for money?" So I'll let him.
Mike Bell, financial consultant for the city utilities. the chronological order from the last rating was such that with the work that was done now 2 years ago on the electric rates, when that came to a stop, that caused some concern at the rating agencies. And so what they did at that time was they put a negative outlook on the utility rating because of that. The city has met subsequently with rating agencies and largely via telephone conference calls and such after the most recent rates were passed and when the electric bonds were issued to fund the capital projects that Mr. Zern was just describing. The negative outlook is still there and is something that I think they will take a look at the time of the next rating. That is scheduled to happen before the end of the calendar year. Certainly, I think the city has good news in that it was able to get the electric rate package that the staff proposed adopted, and they were sizable increases. And the bonds were issued to do the capital work for the next 3 years that is necessary. So I think that the rating agencies will look at that in a very positive manner. The $74 million is still below the city's target level for cash on hand. So I'm not sure that we'll see an uptick or, you know, I would think, knowing the way the rating agencies act, they're very quick to downgrade and very slow to go up. I would expect that if anything happens, they may move that negative outlook to stable as opposed to increasing the rating. But I think all said, the steps that have been taken to increase the rates, to issue the bonds, are consistent with the city's message to the rating agencies and will be positively impact their position.
And was there anything else that went into the negative outlook aside from the failure to pass the rate increase the first time around, or was that the only?
Well, it was accumulation, I think, of the events prior to Mr. Zern taking command at the utility. There were a number of years when spending exceeded revenues, and the plan had been that the city would issue debt to pay for capital projects, and that did not happen. So the cash reserves were drawn down, and that caused alarm at the rating agencies, and particularly when they saw one attempt to raise rates that failed, that really got their attention. So I think that at this point, the tide has been turned, and the financial plan that they were presented with a year ago, or a little over a year ago now, has fallen into place. And as Mr. Zern said, the key now will be to manage to that plan, to meet the responsibility requirements, start to build that cash back up, and show the rating agencies that, you know, the plan was comprehensive, multi-year, and is now being implemented. And in that case, I would suggest, based on my experience, that what you're likely to see is that negative outlook removed, stable outlook, and then maybe 2-3 years into that plan, then a possibility for an upgrade.
I'm hoping anyway.
It's always good to be positive.
Be nice to save 10 or 20 million on interest on
well, I mean, in that, Mike, I don't know if you can speak to that.
Actually, this has been a fortunate time because interest rates are so low, and those spreads right now are pretty low. So the lower rating and the negative outlook really didn't have much of an impact on the city's on the interest rate and the debt. When rates start going up again, though, that spread's going to change, and your point is very good. I mean, it'll cost more if the ratings are lower.
And it's a point, as we have gone through both in electric and water, talking about the rate revenue enhancements that we need, is to make that point as well. I don't know that resounds with everybody, but you know, folks who know oftentimes a utility is dependent on bonds. As much as we don't want to issue them, when we're talking about a $250 to $300 million repower, we're not going to be able to do a pay-go on that, that's for sure. So, the ability to get that money as cheaply as possible is critical.
Thank you, Mrs. Zhou. Next update, please.
4E, KPI third quarter update.
Thank you, Mr. Zern. Good afternoon, President Yao, members of the Commission. I'm here to provide you with a brief overview of the third quarter KPIs. You should have a copy in front of you. Do you all have a copy? This third quarter covers the period of January 1st through March 31st of this year. So starting off with water, looking at KPI number 3, we imported 11% less, or 160 million gallons, there's a decrease which we imported from MWD during this period of time. We attribute this to the temperate weather conditions. KPI number 14, there was a decrease in the number of main breaks from 6 in the second quarter to 5 in the third quarter. However, we're up to 14 total up to this point in the year, with 1 quarter left to go, which is 5 more than we had for all of last year.
And I saw can I ask a question about that, Mr. Powers?
Sure.
So I saw in a separate report here somewhere that the target for year-end, I guess it's not a target, the projection for year-end is actually 18. So with that, are there actions being considered in order to address those?
You just saw them. Those bond proceeds being invested into the distribution system.
Okay.
That's the answer. Is I felt that we needed to put our efforts towards our distribution and transmission. So pipes in the ground, and that's really what's going to do it. Is getting old pipes out and replacing those, relining pipes, and getting new valves in place, and that's going to address this issue. But it does show you the correlation we have there with the aging system and the need, I think, that we have.
For the investment in the
investment into that particular part of the water infrastructure.
Thank you.
Sure. Moving on to KPI number 15, average time to repair main breaks. That actually increased by about 1 hour and 45 minutes this last quarter. But even though we had fewer main breaks, the complexity and the size of them was pretty extensive during the first quarter. I think Mr. Zern touched on that during his presentation. Moving on to electric. KPI number 28. During this quarter, GW experienced 1 preventable outage, bringing our total to 2 so far this year. Again, this is the result of Ramon's group doing continued preventative maintenance operations and implementing root cause analysis to strengthen the distribution system when outages do occur. And then KPI number 29 and 30, which track the percentage of overloaded transformers and transformer failures. Both of those indices continue to improve. And again, this is attributed to better planning and load reductions throughout the system. Moving on to supply, KPI number 49 and 50, we saw both a decrease in the cost of purchase power as well as a slight decrease in the total power supply expense per kilowatt hour from the second quarter. This decrease in the cost of purchase power is primarily the result of seasonal variations in loads and supplies, and then the market's reaction to those variations. However, natural gas prices are cyclical, and we could experience an increase as we move into the warmer months of the fourth quarter, which happens to coincide with the purchase of gas for storage for the upcoming winter. And then finally moving on to finance, which Mr. Zern has already touched on, but KPI number 61, cash reserves compared to the utilities reserve policy. We saw a net increase of 2%, or $2.48 million from the previous quarter. And that concludes my very brief report, and our staff are available for questions.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, another one I draw your attention to is number 62 when you have budget, actual versus budget O&M expense. And you see where it came in the previous year when we were operating, spending more than we had projected. And we've got that down to a number that's 75%, that's probably a little lower, but I would like to be around that 85% number, so we're below that. That's, what I say that's probably a little bit low because we'll see what happens in this last quarter. But, that's to me, a very critical indicator that we've turned certain things around internally so that we're much more conservative in how we're managing our budget.
Very good.
Can you remind us what the council priorities are?
You know what? I don't recall what all of them are off the top of my head. I apologize. Do you recall?
Well, when it comes to council priorities, generally, you saw the series that we put into the budget presentation, which are kind of where we give the snapshot. At this point in time, we go through, we show council these particular items. We haven't had any specific feedback on any of ours. So I don't know that there's been a specific priority given. It's just managing your KPIs and making sure you have KPIs that are really valuable, that have some added value to those who are looking at them, that we're not just filling a piece of paper up with some kind of random information, that they're actually giving you an indication of how we're operating. It can be directly correlated back to how we're operating, whether we're operating well or we're not operating well, either way. So.
What about the abbreviations of those columns? What do they mean?
The FR stands for fiscal responsibility, which is the majority of our KPIs. And again, I apologize. I don't recall what the other acronyms are off the top of my head.
And those were general categories that were set up when the KPIs were initially set up.
I thought they were like Frank Quintal's.
No.
But they're shared by all departments.
I have a question about a couple of questions, actually. So first on number 5. So there, Mr. Powers, it looks like second quarter was sort of an aberration there, right? Where we had first quarter and third quarter were at 0%, but we had 43% in the second quarter, which adds up to really a doubling, I guess, year to date over last year. So two-part question, I guess. First, can you talk more about what sounds like a positive water sample is a negative thing, and then how did we get to the 43% in the second quarter?
I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Abweg on that since it's more of a technical question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, on this one, we're talking about I'm sorry, Ramon Abweg, Assistant General Manager. Good afternoon. This is the positive testing that we have to report that we do. This goes in cycle. This is related to how much time the storage stays, how much storage we have and how long they stay. And so what we've been doing is we're starting a program where we're looking at the aging of our distribution system so that the water doesn't stay in storage that long. What we're finding is there's, if they extend over a period of time, and depending on the cycles, depending what time of year we have, in the summer we hardly see this because we're using a lot of water. We're circulating them per se, but in times that there's less usage of water, they're staying in storage longer, we're finding more positive samples that are not bad, but below the limits that we wanted, so we can't deliver them, so we have to treat it more. So.
Okay.
Does that mean that every second quarter we're going to see a high sample?
No.
A way to mitigate it?
That's what we're hoping to fix. So one of the goals staff is looking at is we try to do an aging study and how much we can use some of the waters we have in storage, use that to fill other storage so they're not all at high levels.
Anything else?
Yeah, so one other, thank you for that. One other on the issue of safety, I guess, combination of KPIs 33 and 39. So on 33, as I was going through the report in sort of a linear mode, right, you look there and you see that we've had a considerable drop in terms of our OSHA incidents. But then on 39, then you see it looks like it just doesn't correlate to my mind, an increase in the number of work days lost per employee due to occupational accidents.
Yeah,
Those, Mr. President, members of the commission, those two don't often correlate. OSHA issue, if somebody could get hurt on the job and go through our workers' comp process, and it would not necessitate an OSHA review or violate an OSHA program or a rule or regulation. So they don't actually correlate. The OSHA is usually you don't want to see OSHA complaints on your sheet at all. You know, those are usually pretty significant and serious. Whereas we could have somebody that turns their ankle while they're climbing a pole, and that could result in lost work days. That wouldn't be an OSHA issue, but it certainly is a workers' comp issue, an IOD, injured on duty situation.
Okay.
And some of the claims too are delayed. One of these, I recall, there was somebody that got a spider bite that happened a week before. Like Mr. Zern stated, it's not OSHA reportable, but it just happened during work hours.
Well, based on that, yeah, good to see actually the significant drop in what would be the more serious types of injuries that would be OSHA recordable injuries. So positive move on that measure.
Or incidents. Sometimes they're incidents that didn't result in an injury, but they are incidents that are in contrast to what an OSHA regulation may be.
Okay.
Great. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Bragg and Mr. Powers. All right, next item, please.
5, oral communications.
I don't have any calls with me, so let's move on.
6, old business. A, water rate update.
All right, since these two gentlemen next to me were here last month, I requested at least an update, and I'm not sure if Mr. Zern has any updates since the last meeting.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the Commission, we have taken this item to Council to set the public hearing as required under Proposition 218, and that has been done, and those notifications have been put in the mail and, to our knowledge, delivered, at least by yes, you got it. So it's been delivered, and that's a 45-day period with the hearing set for July 22nd, the City Council meeting of July 22nd. However, we're proposing to come back to you as a commission in a special meeting at the end of this month to give you as much information as we can and allow you to have the opportunity to make a recommendation if you see fit. Kind of a tight schedule because we have vacations. The council is taking a certain break during that period as well. We got the 4th of July. So, but we are hoping by having all of the community meetings completed by that point that we're able to give you the input that we heard from the community. Maybe you will in fact hear it yourselves. And then the only difference from when we came to you last month is, and we really didn't elaborate on what our revenue enhancement program was going to be, because that's, again, a function of council deciding which way to go. But we had put in there from a staff perspective to meet a number of specific goals in regards to the council mandated reserve levels and other things of a 5-5-4-4-4 5-year rate increase or revenue increase program. Council looked at that and decided, at least for the purposes of the Prop 218 notice, that they would go with a 5-4-4-4 4-year plan. That's what would be the starting point. Now, when I say proposed, that's all it is, because it has not been voted on, as you know. So, still the council could go lower than that. They could still do 0 if that's their prerogative. But we'll find out more about that when we get to the July 22nd meeting. In the meantime, we'll, at our June 30th meeting with you, we'll not only give you an update on our community outreach meetings, but also show you some other information, revenue and budget information, and in how those different scenarios, that 5-4-4-4 plays out. And we also have some other alternatives that we can show you as well. So if you'd be inclined to make a recommendation on a specific plan to council, we can at least provide you with that background information to base your decision on.
Okay, good. Mr. Kamal, go ahead.
So, thank you, Mr. Zern. Question on the community meetings. Actually, a couple of questions
Yes.
on the community. I saw the. Is this an ad?
We've used. That's our flyer. That's an ad. We've got our flyer that we developed.
Okay.
And we've used a number of different media venues to get the message out, including newspaper, social media, our webpage, and so forth.
So question, I guess. So this ad, I think it is, looks like a column in a newspaper, designed for a column in a newspaper. Is that being done in languages other than English? Are we communicating to folks in language? Then second question would be, how are the meetings facilitated? Who runs these meetings? Is there a feedback mechanism? And then third question related to the first question is sort of, do we have people present at these meetings to help communicate in language?
As you can see, I'm holding up here the flyer we have, and then on the back you have the information in Spanish, in Armenian, and in Korean in this particular case. And all of our publications that go out, at a minimum, state that if you would like to have this information in a different language, to notify us. So we'll either get a translator or we'll provide it to you. So at a minimum, a lot of times the information itself goes out with the various languages on that. The community meetings are we have somebody that assists us in facilitating those. It's a staff presentation, very similar to what you have seen us give, and then we open it up to questions, and we allow the community to ask questions. We do our best to try to provide an answer there. If we can't, then we will get back to them with an answer as well. Anybody who needs translation services, we'll make sure that that's provided. And if somebody comes up to us and just says, we may not be able to do it that night because we won't know exactly what we're dealing with, but if they want that in the language they're more comfortable with, then we'll provide that for them. There have been past in the electric rate meetings in the past where we've gone into a particular venue that is primarily an Armenian-speaking venue, for instance, and we've brought a translator with us at that time. In fact, we had the presentation translated to Armenian, but by all means, anybody who wishes to have it done in another language, we can do that.
Okay. And then I suppose, thank you for that. Based on what you're saying, as folks ask questions, in some cases they're answered kind of on the spot. Other times, I guess it happens after the fact. Assuming that some folks might ask questions that are on the minds of other folks in Glendale, is there a process through which we sort of publish these questions and answers for the edification of others?
Yes, one of the things we do is we film one of the meetings. Likely, is it the second meeting?
Second meeting.
Second meeting we're having at the police community room. Our first meeting is Wednesday up in Spar Heights. Second is Thursday at the police community room. That one we film on GTV6, and then we show that. And like you said, a lot of times questions are asked at those particular meetings that are on the minds of a lot of people in the community. So we hope that's effective. We also record questions taken, and we put those into a format on our website that comes in. These questions have been asked, and here's our answer to those questions, along with frequently asked questions. And we'll take those in on not only the community meetings, but emails, tweets, whatever it may be.
Thank you, Mrs. I'm curious about the council's direction. I mean, you mentioned that you're going to look at the 5444 for a 4-year instead of the old proposal. How likely will council accept that based on your discussion with them or what you inkling?
Well, Mr. Yao, that was simply where they felt comfortable putting it into the required Proposition 218 notice. At the end of the day, the council can come back and they could do that proposal or anything lower than that without having to go back out to another Proposition 218 process. If for some reason they decided they wanted to go higher than that, we'd have to do another Proposition 218. I can't speak for what the council may ultimately do, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to go for a higher rate. So they can do anything. They can do the rate that's included in the Prop 218 notice. They can do anything lower than that. They could do a 2-year. They could do a 1-year. They could do a 3-year.
Well, our plan as this commission is not to propose unlimited various options, but to maybe have a top 3 solutions or a recommendation. So potentially 5444 is an option, but there's also maybe variations that we can consider as a recommendation, a final recommendation to the council. But we want to make sure that they'll be comfortable enough to know that that's what this commission is comfortable enough to do. And so potentially that could be lower. And so is there another various options that you think council will be able to approve as a majority?
What we will show you is the same thing we showed council, which had the 5-4-4, the 4-year option, but there is also at least 3 other options that we worked up for council that are anywhere from lower rates to less years. So they may be lower rates over a 4-year period. That we even have a 3-year option, and we'll show you those as well. And those are the same things that we showed the city council for consideration. And we'll show you what the impacts of those are on the water fund. And that'll give you an opportunity, as I said, to use that as a basis to make your recommendation, or maybe you'll have a recommendation that isn't on our chart.
Is there one from this commission? I mean, Commissioner Hale or Carmichael, is there a rate structure that you think will be approved by the council that still satisfies staff's needs? Is it the 5444 or 4333? Any other suggestions?
Well, I'm personally withholding judgment until we've seen the results of the community discussions and breakdown once from staff once those conclude. And I think that, you know, our sort of responsibility here is to do what's in the best interest of the utility, and council will make its decision, taking that into account.
And again, we'll give you a presentation at that 30th meeting. So we'll show you the background, and we'll probably be a little redundant in some of those things that you've already seen when we had Bartles and Wells here giving you an overview of the COSA, but also show you some of the financial options that we've worked up.
What about the drought rate? Is that still being considered, or?
Yes.
Okay. Can there be discussions on what that drought rate will look like, or has that been already finalized?
No, nothing's been finalized. We simply showed council the proposed drought rate that same one we had shown you. So there had been a couple questions, as I recall, about how that factored into fixed rate versus variable rate, and we explained those as I did with you about, some of our thought process that went into this was we were looking at changing the fixed versus variable ratio from 70-30 to 60-40, but I thought that impact was too great on the ratepayer. Plus, it means you pay every day, whether we're in a drought situation or not, whereas a drought rate would only be in effect during the council mandated drought period or water conservation period. And then once that's lifted, the fee goes back to the way it was. So.
And that sounds fine. I mean, as I mentioned last month, I don't think it's appropriate to consider drought rate unless it's increasing the rate for the people who actually use the most water. I think we can have a rate where when we do implement a mandatory conservation, that the people using in the tier 3 structure would be the one paying it. Because the people living in 5,000 square feet home with 2 acres of lawn to water, they should be the one paying it more because they're using the most water.
And they will. They will pay
and
more.
They will, but I think the people in the maybe tier 1 shouldn't pay anything, even in the mandatory drought conservation, because they're trying to do their best. So I think if there's a way that you can show, Mrs. Zone, next time you're presenting this rate, is that what impact does it have for those tier 3 users? Can they pay pretty much 100% of that cost if we were to implement a mandatory conservation?
We'll show you how each of the tiers in the categories are impacted.
Right.
Drought rate.
Right.
And then we'll talk to you a little bit more about fixed versus variable costs and the fact that if you use less water, it doesn't make our costs go away.
Right.
And it's a temporary measure, so we can't temporarily cut our costs. We can't lay off so many people and then bring them back. So this was, from a staff perspective, a way that we could maintain the situation that the position financially we needed to maintain in order to keep our budget projections effective, and at the same time not over penalize the user with, let's say, a fixed versus variable structural change.
Right.
So we'll show you all that. We've got that, and we've got slides.
No, but the option I was interested in is just looking at only the tier 3 impact doing the mandatory conservation, so that those people will be the one paying the makeup of your lost revenue. If you can consider that.
Well, we can show you the different categories, and then we can look at putting it all on the tier 3. The problem there is that you're going to have, because it is mandatory conservation, so you're going to have a pretty good. I don't think you're going to have enough people that are in that tier 3 and gross abusers that it's going to be able to cover your costs. So then you're going to have to go back and raise the rate anyway, and that's off the top of my head. But all those factors that could play out had an impact
Yeah,
on
there
the
could be a
decision
handful
we
of
made.
tier
The
three
recommendation
folks,
we made, I
right?
should say.
But if you can make it
But we'll show
an
you some of
option,
those.
right, that'll be
Sure.
helpful to look at if we do go that route, or maybe just lower down to tier two. Maybe the people who are top users of tier two, then hopefully that will make up your revenue.
The idea would be that for those that are the most conscientious and the low users, you should see no impact in your bill.
Right.
That's the idea. And that those are that are using the most and the highest tiers will pay a premium. So if they aren't conserving at all, they're going to pay a premium. If they're only conserving 10%, and we base ours on a 20% conservation, they're going to pay a steeper rate. And then if you're down at that 20% and you're in line with what our objectives are, you should see no increase in your
Right.
bill. Maybe
And it could be exponential increase to those tier three level. It doesn't have to be equivalent. It could be 100%, 200% increase.
I only look across to Ms. Godinez to say, when you start to do things like that, are you getting 218?
Potentially. I mean, if you start raising rates beyond what we put in our notice, then you could run into a problem. So it would really be very dependent on how it got structured.
Or in one category, if we overcharged one category to make up for another category, that's a subsidy.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Indeed.
that may be that's off the top of my head. I don't know.
No, it's the same all residential category, just that the high users pay more. So potentially that could be in line with Prop 218. There
Well, we'll
is-
see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm not.
Okay,
I'm
please
not
do.
an attorney, so I will.
President, yeah, you had asked me a question about attendance at the community meetings, and I wanted to follow up for the benefit of the commission that because this is squarely within your jurisdiction and it's a topic that you also will be considering, we would certainly want to have each and every one of you, if you're able to attend, to come to our community meetings, but we can't have more than 2 of you at any one community meeting. So hopefully you'll be able to attend. There are a number of dates, but we would want you all to coordinate that so you're not all at the same one.
So just email each other which ones you're attending if you can make it, and then we'll make sure that no more than 2 on any of those events. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Zone? Anything else? Okay, so I guess the next step for this agenda item is to have an action item for next meeting, right? Considering all the other options. Anything else about that? So we'll be comfortable in making a recommendation to council based on the options that have been discussed so far?
Yes, after the briefing, I think on the 30th, I think that's an appropriate thing for this commission to do.
Because I don't think staff will have time to readjust any additional variations, because that's pretty much the last day that we need to make an action item to go to council.
Yep.
That's why I was opening it up for any additional suggestions before, so the staff can come back on the 30th with any other options that you might want to look at.
I actually, Mr. President, feel comfortable that we've got a couple there that are, again, they're the ones we're showing council, and it doesn't mean that council can't go off the page and look at something different. But I think if we're in line with what the commission's in line with what we're showing council, at least you're consistent in what the options you're looking at.
May I ask what's the next step for council if they don't like the options that the commission recommended and what staff provided? What if there's no majority vote on the rate option? Do they wait until the next month where staff comes back with different options?
Well, they could send us back to look at different options. That would probably necessitate a whole new Prop 218 process. They could say we want to defer a rate increase for a period of time. There's a lot of different things they could do. They could adopt the rate that's in the 218 notice. They could adopt some other revenue structure outside of that. One of the ones that we've shown them some examples of are their own. So all of those options are available to them.
But if there's no agreement, they still have some time to consider anything less than the 5444.
There's no agreement. Well, they could send, if there isn't a consensus on that, they can give us direction.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we necessarily come back a month later, but they could say, okay, we can't come to an agreement. As a council, we're going to have some further information from staff, whatever that may be, and then that may necessitate a whole new process. I don't know. I'm just guessing based on your question, but
Okay. I thought, Prop 218 wouldn't necessarily start over unless it's exceed the 5444, because we already sent something out saying that might be the rate or lower, and if anything that's lower, we don't have to send anything else.
Right, but I interpreted what you said as that we weren't able to get consensus, and essentially the project kind of comes to the process comes to a halt. So, but again, it's all speculation. I have no idea what the council may do.
Mr. President, to your point about formulating a recommendation that may not have been contemplated in the staff reporting, I think if we agendize this in such a way as to say consideration of water rate increases and formulation of recommendations for the council, that would free us to have that discussion as a commission and then come up with a recommendation that may or may not have been one of the ones that staff recommended or may have some variation on what staff recommended.
We can definitely structure it in a way that you can not only provide a recommendation, either whether it be what staff proposes or like you suggest, we could have an open-ended motion that you could make an alternative recommendation. And to President Yao's point, there's the procedural requirements of Prop 218, which requires that you put out a notice with you'd have to have the maximum amount of your rate increase, but there's also substantive requirements in Prop 218, which include the requirement that it be cost-based rates for each class of customers. So there is some discretion to play around with it, but you do still have to abide by those substantive principles. So whatever we come up with would have to meet those requirements, and if it doesn't, then we could certainly evaluate it, but we'd have to go back and make sure that it's consistent with Prop 218. My understanding is whatever you present is going to be something that's been vetted under Prop 218 and will meet those needs.
That's correct. That's correct. Those options that we'll show you and which we've shown council would allow the council the flexibility to adopt those and still remain within the current Prop 218 process. In other words, they're at or lower than what's being proposed through the notice, public hearing.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
And then for our 6:30 meeting, stepping back to the legislative update, is it possible for us to agendize this in a way that we could actually consider the SCAPA list of bills and then make our recommendations for the council in terms of support and opposition or having the city take a position on some of those bills?
Yes, we could put that as an action item, and I guess we'll have to see whether it's the same pending list of bills or there may be others that are added or subtracted at that point. But we could, subject to what Mr. Zern thinks, that could be added as an action item from a legal standpoint.
So, I'd like to propose that, and with regards to the timeliness issue, the legislature will go into recess in the fall, but then they will come back for end of session, where they will take up the vast majority of these bills. So we will, that gives us plenty of time for the council to, for us to make our recommendation for the council, for the council to approve a position, and for the city itself to weigh in on some of those bills.
Good recommendation. Yeah, that'll allow us to move more quickly.
And I think for future legislative updates, we might consider that being a normal course of action. It's just allow us to take action on those when we actually have that list before us.
We certainly could do that.
Yes, we can do that.
Have we moved on to number 7 already? Agenda forecast?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are we done with 6A, waterway updates? Any more questions about that? No? Then let's officially close that out, then we can talk about the agenda forecast.
7, agenda forecast.
Okay, so we're talking about the motions for the next meeting.
So I think we got something lost in the translation here because outside of elections of president and secretary, which Ms. Godinez, I'll defer to you, doesn't necessarily have to take place at that meeting, or does it?
No, it does not.
Okay. And we can certainly put the item on the legislative, the motion to make a specific recommendation. I would sure like to keep the rest of the meeting strictly on the rates and our ability to give you the full presentation, the feedback we've gotten, some of the questions we've had, then give you ample time to debate what options are available and what option you ultimately will decide to recommend to council. So while we don't have a meeting for the month of July, would be to move the majority of that calendar down then into August, and that would be our August meeting.
Okay. Yeah, so the 6:30 meeting is in effect our July meeting.
Right.
So then I think what I hear you saying is we might or might not keep the elections on for 6:30, but we'll focus on rates.
Well, the elections are up to you. Do you want us to keep those on, or would you like to put those off? That's totally up to you. I don't think it takes a lot of time to do it. And I think we got it on here because we're trying to stay consistent with the fiscal year, not having a July meeting. But again, totally up to you. It's not
So let's keep that on for now. Just depends on who's here. If there's
okay.
Let's
So
keep
we'll
the
have
elections.
that and our the specific two bills that the commission would like to make a recommendation to council to take a specific position on, and the rates. That's what I really have.
And then as
Are
part
we
of the
putting the
rates,
two bills? Are we putting the docket?
I would actually
of-
propose the entire SCAPA list.
Oh,
'cause
I'm sorry.
I can
I'm sorry,
take a look
Mr.
through
Hale,
the-
you did say
yeah,
that, the
yeah.
entire, now that we've got that, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Whatever the SCAPA list is at that time.
the contemporary SCAPA list.
and then as part of the rate discussion, we said earlier that we would include the drought rate as part of that broader rate discussion. So that'll be in June?
It is part of it.
It already is?
Yes,
Okay.
it's already built into it.
Just I'd like to see the last option of increasing just the tier 3.
Okay, so then the water conservation update, the utility modernization update, energy risk management update, water service division update, and strategic plan update all would shift to August?
Correct.
Although I guess water conservation update already is on there. So those other items, so there are 4, will then transition to August agenda.
Correct.
Is there anything within those 4 that is time sensitive enough that it causes concern for that
No,
change
sir.
in timing?
No, sir.
Okay.
All right, you good?
There are a couple other things that came up, I think, during the conversation here. Just want to ask. So,
Sure, go ahead.
talked about revisiting the bond rating at some point. When would that be appropriate?
Probably towards the end of the year. As Mr. Bell indicated, and I had said earlier, my thought was we've gotten that first reach out from one of the agencies, and the others will probably come. Either we'll do it in person or through a conference call, but I would imagine by the end of the year. So maybe that's something we put on in November, December, if not January, but hopefully we can get it done.
Can I suggest then, within that, at least to remind us, we can always revise the forecast, right? So, can I suggest we do that in November?
We'll put it on the November just as a placeholder, and if it's happened
Bond
sooner,
rating.
we can do that. We will.
Thank you. And then I had one other possible item. So that was the discussion around the Grayson power plant repowering. There was some conversation there about there are a variety of options. Would that be an appropriate thing for this commission to address? And if so, what would be the appropriate timing to perhaps do a little bit more of a deep dive into what are those options? and
We're
how-
going to make a presentation to the commission at some point, and I believe that the point would be when the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, is completed. That's where it lays out in more detail the options. I'll have to get you specifics on when that is. My sense is that that's going to take us a little bit of time. We hope to initiate that process probably July next month. It's already next month. And then we'll come back to you when that plan is more finely tuned and show you the different options.
So here again, I just think in terms of just so that we don't lose it, I'd appreciate if we could put that as a placeholder in August or September.
Well, we won't be done anywhere near that time. So let me find out when we get a date when I have something that I can bring you of substance, and I'll make sure that we put a placeholder for
Well,
it.
let's put it in October then, since there's only 2 items. How about October, just a
Sure.
placeholder? We can move it to November.
Yeah, and,
Sure.
and to be clear, I'm not suggesting that in as early as August that we actually have the presentation. I mean, maybe we could characterize it as a forecast on the Grayson power plant repowering options. So what do you think the appropriate timing would be for that?
Well, I think it's going to be next year. But we can certainly put it on, maybe even we put it on the January box right here just to keep it as a placeholder.
Okay.
I think in an interest to have a conversation about that a little bit sooner than later, maybe we actually have a discussion about the resource mix. Not just Grayson, but where's coal at in our portfolio?
Yeah.
Where's gas
We can
at
do
in
that.
our portfolio? Where's solar? Where's
We
wind?
can do
Where's
that.
geothermal?
Actually, each year we bring you a renewable
Yeah, the RPS update.
presentation.
But-
And we've tried to combine that in our presentations to council and bring that to you at the same time, but we could do them as a single item.
Yeah,
rather bring you the renewables sooner than probably what the IRP results will be.
Or maybe even something that's a little bit more of a deep dive than what we traditionally do on the RPS, and start forecasting some of the potential future plans for what the resource mix looks like, 10 or 20 years down the road. Yeah, and I know that's...
And I mean, because the way we trade is not that way. We aren't long-term. But let me talk with staff and see what we can put together.
Yeah, because I think that would be a useful conversation for us to have for the benefit of the public about, where is that capital strategy going, right? Because if we're repowering Grayson to make it last for another 5 or 10 years, then 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to have another conversation about repowering Grayson and have spent $40-50 million on the whole enterprise. So I think it's worth having at least a conversation, even if it results in a debate and discussion, but doesn't result in necessarily an action item. I think it's good to have that conversation.
Yeah, we'll tie that into our renewable, and we'll just, like you said, we'll get a little bit further into the weeds on it.
And not just renewables, because it's got the entire portfolio.
We'll have the
it's got to include the
portfolio.
fossil portfolio.
Because we have contractual obligations that we have to meet.
Sure.
There are growing opportunities for us to ink longer-term contracts with some of the renewable stuff. To the extent that those make sense. We've been looking at those a little bit more than we have in the past.
And if they provide you with, power certainty, if you can if you can schedule them like baseload, then they become a lot more attractive.
And also on the renewable side of things, there's abilities for you to get RECs and be able to strip RECs and sell power back and all kinds of different things.
So when should we have that update? I mean, we name it as resource mix and renewable.
September, October.
I think you could put Ms. Godinez. We go back to council with our
Power
package
content label, I think, goes in September or October traditionally.
So we'll put it down on September here and see where that goes.
And how are we characterizing that? Are we characterizing that agenda item as resource mix, including Grayson Power Plant repowering options?
I think it's... I don't have it.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that we can forecast to the future on that. Okay. So it'll be, I'll have it probably worded in a way that we can cover a greater
Excellent. Okay.
scope.
All right, fantastic. Anything else? If not, then let's adjourn the meeting into June 30th of this month, a special meeting on the water rates. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.